You're listening to C Major Before the Show. It is June 1st. We have lots to talk about today. It's Saturday, June 1st, and we are aiming to talk about G flat and B on today's episode of C Major Before the Show. It is June 1st. The year is pretty much halfway through. And you know what that means. We have more chords to talk about. And even though we're at the halfway mark of our 12-week series, we still want to continue with our chords theme and to make it fun and interesting for you to learn to play the piano. I definitely have something to say about that on today's episode. I've just been thinking about it. You know, it seems like most people think there's only one or two ways to approach playing the piano. I think I'm finding there are many ways to do that. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And then please see us tomorrow on the C Major Radio Show. We're really excited for you. You're on your way to writing down music clearly. It seems to be working out. I know that you're growing stronger as you practice writing down music and just taking those first steps in music theory. So, speaking of practicing on today's show, we will talk about G flat and B. We'll work on that together, and I'm so glad that you're here. It's beautiful weather here in the greater New York City area. I really couldn't ask for better weather, really. And I know it's going to be raining a little bit later on, but we're not thinking about that right now. In the moment, we're just enjoying the sunshine while we can, and so pretty soon we'll all be enjoying some beach weather on the weekends. And then for that reason, we also may decide to shift the podcast to a different day so that you can enjoy the weekend and be out and about with your friends and family and not think, oh, I need to tune into a podcast. But at the same time, we are available by download on demand. But stay tuned for any further announcements on a shift to another day during the week, just for the summer break. So let's get to it, because I wanted to do a little bit of musical typing today. So as I lower my music, I'm just going to go to my program. If you have your laptops, get out your laptops and let's do some musical typing together. Also, I wanted to play a sample from our program last week. I know I mentioned it over at the C Major Radio Show. I mentioned it a little bit here, but we actually ended up playing the program over at the C Major Radio Show. And if I have a chance, I'll try to repost it over here so you can hear it here too. By the way, I hope you've been able to follow us as we've migrated over. So I'm just going to start this podcast, and when I have a moment to tune into it so that it's running, then I will go ahead and play a little sample of it so you can hear it as well over here. So let's just go back to my uploaded episodes. Let's just start running it. It's about a little over an hour. So if you have the time to listen, I think you'll be in for a treat. So let's go back to my musical typing program. So I'll bring that up in a second. So just hang with me. It'll take me just a few moments to get through these chords, and then we'll be on to other things here on C Major Before the Show. Okay, so now, if you have your program pulled up and you know the one that I use, if you have a question about it, get in touch with me. I'll let you know the one that I use. And if you go to the window where it says musical typing, you can bring it up. So it says musical typing. My view says musical typing, and there's a hyphen, and it says grand piano on stage. Okay, so if I'm aiming to play a G flat chord, I'm just going to tell you. I'm not going to sound it right now. I'll sound it a little bit later just to recap. But let's try to do it without sound right now. So you'll hear me typing, but you won't hear the sound of the chord. Okay, so as I'm looking here, I see I have the option to play a G flat major chord by pressing on my computer the letter T, the letter U, and the letter O. Okay, so you can do the same thing. So anybody who's played the G flat etude by Chopin or something else in the key of G flat, you know that it's all black keys. Some people even call it the black key etude. I went to school with somebody who was very, very adept at playing the black key etude, and that was his show-off piece, and he didn't disappoint. Okay, so all black notes. And then we have the B chord. So B chord was kind of the odd chord because last week we talked about the B flat chord because we were talking about all flats. But I wanted to wait this week and just talk about B. So B is going to be a little bit tricky because on this computer I can really, let's see if I can shift the octave real quick. No, that's not going to help. So on musical typing is only going to show me a J for the B, and then a P for the D sharp, but I still need an F sharp. So what do? I guess I could invert it and then just go back to the T. Okay, so already I'm talking inharmonically. So I told you that T, U, and O would be for the G flat chord, but here it is again to play a B chord which has an F sharp in it. F sharp inharmonically is the same as G flat. Then to play B, D sharp, F sharp, I have to press the J for the B, and then a P for the D sharp, and then go back and pick up the T for the F sharp. I hope you're following me on that. Okay, so, that's one of the, how should I say, I don't want to say disadvantages, but it really is kind of that. It's a disadvantage if you're trying to find your chords by looking at a computer keyboard. But here it is. I switched over from that picture of the computer keyboard, so it's not showing me the musical typing anymore, but the letters assigned to your keys on your computer keyboard is showing me now. I just switched over to keyboard, grand piano on stage. But again, because I'm using my mouse, there's no way for me to touch the screen and then play those chords. I just have to visually outline the chords. So now I'm going to outline it as G flat, B flat, and D flat. I'm over where it says C3, and then I'm going to go to B, D sharp, and F sharp. So now I can play both triads in root position. So see what you can do. Just play around with that. I will be pulling up the audio for that in a moment after I start sharing my audio with the podcast over at the C Major Radio Show podcast episode. I'm about to sample in just a moment. And let's see. Let's go to our discussion on inharmonics because I think that's important to today's discussion. So if you see the description of today's show, don't be intimidated because I really was trying to bring up the whole idea of keys and key signatures versus scales and chords. All of it really goes together. Although we've been trying really, really hard to stay focused on just chords. So it all kind of works together. So if you can, go to your textbook. I listed in the syllabus, First Steps in Music Theory. I was just talking with one of my students today about really jumping into this book and learning all that you can. So I'm very happy to hear that she's looking to join grade 1 for her practical exam, and then also thinking about music theory. So cheers to her. And so I'm going to have some other shout outs and thank yous a little bit later today. So just stay with me. Okay, so if I'm looking here, I just wanted to get to that part where it's talking about enharmonics. And you know, to be honest, this is really a surprise to me. I didn't know I would be so passionate to talk about music theory. I was the person who would practice 3 to 6 hours a day on just piano and didn't really try to have these type of discussions that I'm having with you on a podcast, but here we are. So I just wanted to get to the part where it's going to say that even if you're playing a G flat, that it will sound the same as an F sharp. I wanted to get to that part because I know that's going to be a question for you. So let me switch over to one of the higher pages. Okay, so here it is. But it's really talking about it within the context of scales and not so much within the context of chords. So it's just talking in terms of playing the scales of F sharp major, which would be enharmonically the same thing as playing the scale of G flat major. But if you look at the key signature, you might be intimidated to see that. So here it is. It says these two pairs of scales are enharmonic equivalents of each other. On a keyboard, the notes of the scale of F sharp major are exactly the same as those of G flat major. And I can already hear the argument now among music theorists, but will it sound the same? Technically, it should, but my addition to that would be it depends on what it's following. So if your mind is thinking sharp as opposed to flats, will it sound the same following something else? Depends on what comes before it or what comes after it. And anybody who composes music, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So the ear can be a little bit tricky. The ear can be really, really tricky. Also, it might be to your benefit to have a tuner as well, like a pocket tuner, where you can just even test the sharpness or the flatness of the instrument that you're playing on. So that's another consideration too. And then following that, you talk about the scales of G flat major, and then you go on to talk about relative minors, which we're not going to talk about in this course. Now I wanted to see if there was a chapter on enharmonic equivalence. I think there was. I just wanted to give you a little information about how they discuss that. Okay, so that really comes up when you're talking about double sharps and flats. Let's just turn to that page. Okay, so if you know what the sign of a double sharp looks like, or the sign which would lower a note by 2 half steps, which we call a double flat, then you know it forces you to talk about something called enharmonic equivalence. So notes which sound the same. So again, there's that argument. Do they really sound the same? I don't know. I think that it depends on what follows it and what comes before it. But notes which sound the same but have different names are sometimes said to be spelled differently, and they're also described as enharmonic equivalents. So for instance, B sharp is the enharmonic equivalent of C, and then so is D double flat, and then all 3 notes are considered enharmonic equivalents of each other. So just be careful of that too. If you're playing chords, if somebody tells you, okay, play an F sharp chord, just know it's supposed to be the enharmonic equivalent of G flat, for instance. And then get out your pocket manual of musical terms. I did not put this on the syllabus. It's something that I'm considering putting it. I'm considering putting it on the syllabus, but I don't really know for sure if I will. But it's just another source for you to consider. It's in its 5th edition. They give you some elements of notation. They give you definitions. They give you a biographical list of famous musicians. But I'm also looking for something that's a little bit more 21st century in terms of the publisher. So let's just see what this book has to say about enharmonic, and then we'll keep it moving. Okay, so if you happen to have this book, it's red, you can turn to page 85 of the book, and it says enharmonic tones. That's the way it's listed here. Tones derived from different scale degrees, but practically identical in pitch. See, that's what I love. They give you some room. They give you some leeway there. They're practically identical. You could argue that it's not exactly identical. So, like in the case of C sharp and D flat on the piano or organ, enharmonic chords, exactly what we're talking about today, enharmonic chords, chords differing in notation but alike in sound. Such chords are called enharmonically changed, and passing from one to the other is called enharmonic modulation. So they give you an example, interval, one formed with two enharmonic tones. So if you happen to have a teacher, just try to have that conversation. Try to get into that conversation with your teacher and say, what are your thoughts on, and then mention the word enharmonic. By the way, enharmonic is spelled E-N. So I know with some of my students, I can't assume that they already know how to spell things. Some of them are better at spelling than others. Speaking of spelling bee, did you guys watch what happened on the National Spelling Bee this year? 8 winners. That was amazing. So if you happen to jump into First Steps in Music Theory, read all that you can, and then check the book of musical terms. And then we're going to come to our other book where we talk about what it takes to learn a musical instrument, because I also want to talk with you about your approach for continuing to learn a musical instrument, and hopefully, in this case, it's piano. And then we'll come back to our aim for next week and the week after, actually. Okay, let's see where we are in our audio. I've been playing this podcast episode. It started off with drums. That's why I didn't really want to spend too much time having you listen to what the drummers were doing. I wanted to have you listen to what the piano players were doing. But I think we may be somewhere in the middle or toward the end of the drums. Okay, so I'm going to turn up my sample. Don't be alarmed. You're going to hear some change in the volume and the audio. But this is from one of the local recitals that took place in the greater New York City area. And so I will be back in a few minutes after this has some time to play. And so you're listening to C Major Before the Show. portion of the program. And it begins with Michelle Keaton. And echo song, and then I got headphone. Okay, and you're here on C Major Before the Show. Just want to play a little sample of that. It's encouraging to hear the efforts of students that are either drum students or voice students or piano students, and you're putting forth your very best. So just wanted to give a little bit of time to that. And if you have a chance, go on over to the C Major Radio Show. We're just starting to attract listeners over there because we were over on one platform and then we came over to this platform, so we're just really happy to be over here. And then we've migrated, and so our migration is complete, and so we should be able to have you start following the C Major Radio Show over here now. So if you have any questions about how to get on or how to follow, how to subscribe, how to like those things, then, please let us know. But our migration is officially complete as of this week. So we're really happy about that. And we know that we're also starting to face summer break. So some of you are going on break. And to help with that, what we want to do is decide if we should move the podcast to a day during the week where it's easier for you to listen as you're out and about, as you're driving from place to place. So let us know if there's a day in the week that you're more likely to listen, because that's the day that we want to move over to. Now, I have some other things on my list to talk about. And so before we get too far into that, let's go back now to my musical typing program, because I wanted to make sure I sounded those chords for you so you can hear what those chords sound like. Okay, so I'm pulling that up now. Okay, so hope you still have your laptops out. So the audio for this is just going to demonstrate how it would sound if you just pecked out, basically, literally with your mouse, if you pecked out the outline of a G-flat triad. There we go. And then I am going to move and play it an octave higher, so you can hear it over there too. Okay, so you hear these higher octave ranges. So we start at low, close to C2 on this keyboard as it's showing me. And then, okay, now if I switch it back to where I'm playing it as musical typing, it really only gives me that one option to play it the way I was saying before. If you literally type the letter T on your computer keyboard, the letter U and the letter O, you can sound a G-flat chord like that, okay? And then you can switch the octaves as you want to. So same thing, if I just peck it out one at a time. Now, what I was finding difficult to do was if I wanted to play a B chord. So if I'm pressing a J on my computer keyboard, and then I have to go back and pick up the T. Okay, so it forces me to play that B chord or the B triad as an inversion. So you hear it? Okay, and then I can toggle between the two, G flat, and then I can go to B. Okay, so hopefully you can hear that. And then I'm going to go back to my keyboard and just peck out the B chord. So now peck it out in order. So here you can see I can go straight up to that F sharp. And then again, inharmonically, F sharp is a G flat. Let me do it an octave higher. Okay, you see what I did there? I can even go higher. Okay, and this is just me clicking on the mouse. So this is just showing you can make music anywhere, really, if you just put your mind to it and just use your mouse, use your laptop, and just go for it. So music theory is possible on a laptop. It's possible on a piano. It's possible away from a piano. And so there's just so many ways to make music now. And I just think about my students that are finding so many ways to make music. So that's great. I also want to share with you some thank yous that have come to me over the past couple of weeks from students that have been taking piano lessons. And they're either going to continue on this path or they're going to do something else. So that happens. That happens. I mean, you think that someone's going to stick with piano the way that you did for many, many years, and then something happens and they just change their path. It could be a family decision. It could be something else. But I'm going to share those thank yous with you back in a moment. And you're here with C Major here on C Major Before the Show. We're about to read to you some thank yous that have come across my desk from students that have been really, really grateful for their piano lessons experience, and they're letting me know that, and I really appreciate it too. So I played some audio a little bit earlier. I don't know if you had a chance to hear it. If you're just joining us now, we are giving you some highlights from this year's recital, and you may have heard what sounded to you like some scuffling and some noise, background noise, and then you heard some drumming going on, and then after that you heard a little bit more scuffling, and then you heard piano. What I want you to know is that you just heard the music making of some of the youngest students that were there in this year's recital. That drummer that you heard has her 2 front teeth missing because she's 6 years old. And listen to it again, because it was just remarkable to hear a drummer at 6 playing the mature piece that she played with a track and really holding her own. So I was really amazed at some of the talent that was there this year. And then the first student that played was also very young. She couldn't have been more than 5 or 6. I didn't have a chance to ask her family how old she was, but also missing teeth and also looking to play 3 pieces. So she came to recital really recital ready. She came with 2 pieces, and then when she got there, she added a 3rd piece because she really, really felt comfortable playing on a grand piano for the first time. So I just want to give a little shout out to those 2 very young students inspiring others to make music. I think that's great. They have the support of their family and their friends, and they are making their mark here in the greater New York City area. And so now I want to get to some thank yous. The first thank you is from a student who took piano for about 2 years. I would say she was shy of 2 years. She made her first year this past December, I believe it was, or was it this past October? And then if she had made it to this fall, it would have been her 2nd year. But she decided to choose sports over music making. And quite frankly, she was very, very talented when it came to playing piano by ear and liked to learn just using her listening skills as opposed to her reading skills, and was really, really challenged by that. And so we worked as hard as we could on getting her up to speed with her reading, but it just seemed to me at the end of the day, she was more interested in having a teacher that would show her how to play something, and then she would just jump in and copy that. So somewhere between audio and somewhere between auditory and somewhere between kinesthetic learning, I would say would be her two strongest learning styles. But here's what she says in her note. Just a very, very nice young person. I honestly couldn't thank you more. All the great stories, lessons, and effort you have put in for me. I will forever be grateful. I'm sorry I couldn't continue this music journey with you, but I promise I will continue. Best wishes and luck to you. And she wrote, sincerely. Such a nice note to receive from someone. So I really felt that she really got something out of her piano lessons. And now this next note, you're actually going to hear me opening live here on the podcast. I have not seen what this student wrote, but this student participated in recital for the first time this year. And so what surprised me about this student was that in the lessons, the student just seemed to have such confidence in expressing himself, and was bold in his requests. And then came recital time, and he was just so quiet, just so contemplative. So I enjoyed seeing the difference, but it was the first recital, so we're just hoping that next year will be even stronger. But this is a note from the parents, and it just says, Dear Carol, thank you for a good year of progress in piano. And then the name of the student seems to really enjoy his lessons. So thanks for keeping his enthusiasm alive and your patience. Have a great weekend. And was signed the parents. So that was nice. So what I'd like to do now is just give an applause to both students and to their parents for their support, and to just say thank you so much for allowing me to teach your children piano lessons. It's a great privilege and an honor to help them with their talent. So thank you so much. And so now what we're going to do is move into something that I wanted to read to you when it talks about choosing to learn a musical instrument, because that's still the question that comes up. And the question that I still grapple with, and I'm sure other teachers do too, is how do you get your students to practice? And I think more importantly, how do you get your students to realize how important it is to practice? And to realize there are really no shortcuts. You know, if I could practice for my students, I would. But the good news is that there are so many apps out there, and we're going to talk about that in a moment, because the book mentions it too. You know, if you're looking to teach yourself, all you have to do is just do a quick internet search, and everything you need to know to help yourself practice and to learn piano is there. It's at your fingertips. So I'm going to say a little bit more about that in a moment too. But here in the book, it just says, you know, there are no shortcuts to overall process of learning to play a musical instrument. There really isn't. The difference between success and failure depends on many factors, the most important of which is practice. Many adults look back on their experiences of learning to play and remember with dread being made to practice. Learning to enjoy practice time depends on effective teaching, a well-motivated learner, and a suitable and perhaps supportive environment. And I would say that's true. My experience has been as a teacher that once the students really start to get what will happen if they practice, then it just, to me, that's the turnaround. And then the part where they say something about effective teaching, I think what they're just saying is, how are you as a teacher that really subscribes to pedagogy? If you prefer a different pronunciation, pedagogy, but I say pedagogy. So how do you propose to help that student learn better? How can you break down the information? How can you break down the steps? How can you really put something on their minds? You know, let's just go with something like staccato touch. So if you have the type of teacher that only explained to you there's one way to play staccato and that's it, and they never talked to you about the woodpecker approach or the push off or the kick off, then maybe they were not exposed to a method that talked about it in those terms, or maybe they just weren't that subscribed to pedagogy. Maybe they just said, okay, I'm just going to teach the student the way that I was taught. So that happens. So I think you have the room, and the parents too, to decide what's effective for your child. What's an effective teacher? You may like the teacher's personality, but if for some reason the student isn't progressing the way that you thought they would, what do? Do you switch teachers, or do you sit down and just have a conversation about it and see what can be done? So I have a student like that now that's really kind of at a crossroads. She likes playing the popular music, but her family wants to see her stick to classical. So what do? What's the happy medium? I think just give her both. I had a teacher that was really, really strict, and so she just really stuck to it and said, you know what, you're learning to play classical, that's it, forget all this other stuff. That was my path. I'm glad I followed that, but later on I could see my experience was different from my peers who had no piano lessons at all or started to take and then dropped out. Also, you have family members, in my case, that started taking piano lessons and then just lost patience with it all and decided to choose sports over piano. And I know from speaking with them now in their adult years that they totally regret that. So I think you just have to decide what works best for you. Learning to enjoy practice times depends on effective teaching, a well-motivated learner, and a suitable and perhaps supportive environment. So by supportive environment, I can just think the times when I've worked with somebody in their home and to just see how many distractions they have to deal with. The television being on, the telephone ringing, people in another area of the house talking loudly, a dog, a cat, a bird, a guinea pig, a lizard. Anything can happen to distract you from your piano lessons. Somebody outside fixing the lawn, somebody inside the house doing detailed cleaning, a cleaning service, a vacuum cleaner. I mean, just having to deal with so many distractions if you don't have the environment that's supportive, meaning it's quiet, it's insulated, like the practice rooms that you see in college, at a university. The practice environment for me growing up was very different from the practice environment that I had once I reached college, that I was able to just close the door and I might hear someone else in the next room practicing as well. But to me, that's a more supportive environment. But I think what this book is also referring to is if you have family members that will support you learning music in the first place, or if they just look down on piano as just a hobby and something you really shouldn't waste your time on. So most people find that they benefit from making practice time part of a routine. So if that's you, what I would encourage you to do is just sit down with somebody who can help you with your calendar. And you may like to set aside a suitable time each day. And if you have a choice, a suitable place for this important homework to be done. So we talk about homework here all the time. And so I'm glad to see that this book sees it that way too, as homework. So it doesn't have to be 3 to 6 hours a day. That's for somebody that's performing or looking to give concerts and they really have no room for mistakes. So they have to really stay and be really diligent. But I would say if you can commit somewhere between 15 to 30 minutes a day of just concentrated practice. I know a student that had the opposite supportive environment where as soon as it was time for the piano lesson, the whole entire family would just move to an area and stay quiet and be encouraged to stay quiet just for 30 minutes. So sometimes it's a little surprising to see the family just won't stay quiet for 30 minutes. They try, but there's always some sort of interruption. But I think if you can find a way to make your practice environment as supportive as possible, then just go for it. So when it comes to adult students, I would say that many of the adult students that I've worked with or spoken with are highly enthusiastic about practicing because, after all, they have chosen to learn the instrument and really want to be successful. And I just recall again growing up and seeing some of the adults in the community wanting so badly to learn to play piano that they were willing to practice up to an hour a day. Working adults willing to put that amount of time and to stay focused. One particular person who was an adult put an hour into her practicing, an hour a day, 5 days a week for an entire year, and really made it her business to learn to play piano. And at the end of the year, she had something to show for it. Now, she didn't really stick with it after that because I think she found that it was just too much. It was just too much for her calendar to keep doing that, but she did it. So, little and often is best for beginners of all ages. With everyone being so busy, I would even say sometimes if you could just find 10 minutes to practice, 10 minutes before school, 10 minutes after school, 15 minutes before school, 15 minutes after school, just a little bit at a time. And some students aren't able to work that way. I have students that are procrastinators. They just procrastinate all the time, and they go, I'm really, really busy with debate club. I'm really, really busy with this, that, and the other. I can't do it. I'll wait until winter break or Christmas break, and then I'll put more time and effort into it. But then by that time, you want to spend time with your family. So with those students, I let them know I'm definitely on their side when it comes to learning to play piano, learning what I've given them as homework, and just say, my thoughts will be with you, my prayers will be with you as you go through what it is that you're going through, and I really hope the best for you. And sometimes that works, and sometimes they just say, you know what, let me just take a break and come back to it. So I do like to think that my students want to put forth their best effort. I have very rarely seen a student that will just shut down and say, no, this is not what I want. Usually they want piano and they find a way to get it. So little and often is the best for beginners of all ages, when the repetition of physical actions enables kinesthetic learning to take place naturally, and that's true. Repetition of a particular movement or action enables it to be stored in muscle memory. And also, I recommend speaking out loud what it is that you're practicing. So the books do that. The method books will say, play and say your letter names, play and say your finger numbers, play and say. Some of the students like to do that. Some of them will argue, oh, I can say it in my head. I don't need to say it out loud. But I just see the results from the students that actually say and play what the book is asking them to do. If it isn't going right, it is best to stop and come back to it, as frustration through not being able to do something hinders progress. I would say that's true also. So if you find yourself frustrated, maybe you're having a bad day, just step away from it and come back to it, because you want your attitude to be in the right place. You want to be in a place mentally where you're really, really willing to do it. And that, I think, also is a part of music making and wellness. How well do you feel? And in my case, sometimes playing the piano makes me feel better. 9 times out of 10, I feel a lot better having practiced something and then going on with the rest of my day. So if I'm feeling not so well or not good about what's going on and I sit down to play, 9 times out of 10, I feel better for having sat down and played something. But that's just me. But we're talking about practice here. So if your practice isn't going right, it is best to stop and then come back to it later. So as frustration through not being able to do something hinders progress. So sometimes muscle memory just takes time. Recording yourself practicing. I recommend this. I had a professor that recommended this as well. Just get it back in the day, get a tape recorder. Now it's just get an app and you just put the app on, or just use whatever recording mechanism you have on your device and record yourself practicing, so you have some sort of feedback. How are you doing? How are you sounding? What can you do better? Becoming your own critic and spending a few minutes listening to and watching the results. That's true. It is really helpful. It's a helpful way of self-appraising your work. You become your own best critic. And it can enable you to put something right quickly. And you may find that something that your teacher has said to you in a lesson is echoing in your mind as you watch or listen. That could be true. So if your teacher pointed out something you either agreed with or did not agree with, and then you watch it yourself and you go, oh yeah, I do have a tendency to do that. So, but you don't want to get to the point where you're just totally exasperated. And I will say this about one of the students in the recital. After one of the pieces, the student just let out a big sigh, and everybody kind of chuckled because they could feel this student is really, really putting forth their best effort, and to the point of just probably feeling really tired. She probably practiced a lot. So in between pieces, she just let out a big sigh, and everybody kind of got a kick out of that. But you don't want to practice to the point where you just feel totally exhausted, but you do want to practice so that you start to see some results and to feel that you are progressing. So I have something else to say. What I want to do now is take a little sip of tea or some water, and then I'm going to talk with you about teaching yourself. So you're listening to C Major Before the Show. Believe it or not, today's theme is about chords. We're talking about more chords, G flat and B, but we moved into a different area where we're sharing some thoughts on practicing and teaching yourself. But I will be back in a moment. And you're here on C Major Before the Show. I'm your host, C Major Porter. Thank you so much for tuning in. I just had to get a little sip of something. You know, last week I picked up something called coconut blend. I never tried it before, but it was drastically reduced. We're talking about 75% off. And I later researched it and found it was very expensive, but I got a great price on it, and I'm enjoying it. I just don't know if I'm supposed to drink it straight or if I'm supposed to infuse it into something, maybe like tea or some other juice, but I'm figuring it all out. But anyway, it's very good. Just took like a little sip of it, and so I'm back. So what I want to do now is continue talking about teaching yourself, this question comes up all the time with my students. If it's something that they should be doing by themselves or if they should have a teacher. And I agree with this book where it talks about finding a teacher. Just find someone who can help you with your lessons, who may agree with the direction that you want to go in. And if you're not sure of your direction, then follow that teacher, especially if they are doing a program that looks really, really clear. The path is clear. And it's clear where you're going to go if you just stick with this teacher, and you can see other results with their students. So we just have so many options. I think I agree with this person that says there are millions of ways to learn to do something. And especially now with computers and technology, it seems like there are millions of ways to learn to play the piano. Over 40 million ways, really, if you start to think about it. It's just a number that I just threw out there. But I don't think there's just one way. And I think there are teachers out there looking to change the world with the way that they teach piano lessons. And so hopefully all of these ways, all of these paths are leading to the same point. Just being able to help you do something that you dreamed of seeing yourself do. But the question remains, do you really need a teacher? Or can you teach yourself? What are your thoughts about that? We are looking to do a poll tomorrow on the C Major Radio Show. That may be one of the poll questions. Do you really see yourself needing a teacher, or can you teach yourself? And then just see how many people say yes, see how many people say no. It could be rhetorical. You can respond to the poll. You don't have to respond to the poll. But we want to get to the point where everybody's responding to the poll, that I actually invite you to the poll and that you have a chance to answer yes or no, or in the case of an open-ended question, really give your opinion about something. But if you do a quick search on the internet, you will see there are a number of websites. A number of websites that ask for tuition. Some of them give you a chance to play the piano for free or take a course. Or some give you a free introduction, and then they want you to subscribe. So I've seen that, on YouTube. That's the popular thing. Everybody's supposed to be subscribing to something. So once you get somebody's interest, you hook them, and then all of a sudden you're asking them for money. And so there are a lot of advertisers out there and people on the internet that have their programs and so forth, and they just really swear by that and say, once you really work on your marketing get it to that point where these people are paying attention to what you have to say, hook them, and now make them pay a subscription for that information. So whether it's $7.99 a month or $9.99 a month, but you decide what the value is for you. Is it cheaper to learn online? Is there a way to fuse the learning together so that you're learning online and also learning, sometimes they call it physical learning in person? There is no doubt that many sites will give you easy access to high-quality tuition. And it is perfectly possible to learn in this way. Now, I have a personal story about that with a student that said they learned all they thought they could learn, and then they were ready to have a teacher teach them in person. And to be honest, I found that the way they were learning on their own was really, really good, to the point they were just hungry for having someone to validate all that they had learned and then take them further to the next level. So it could be a case of just figuring out how your fingers go, which fingering to use when you're playing scales, how to read the bass clef a little bit better, and if you're ready to learn a particular genre, things like that. So again, there's no doubt that many sites, many quote-unquote experts out there will have easy access to ways to learn to play the piano. Just be careful of those that charge you a lot of money. So you may end up paying thousands of dollars to learn something that may have only cost you hundreds of dollars in person, but it's up to you. If you have the budget to do it and you don't mind giving that type of tuition, then go ahead. It's perfectly possible to learn on the internet, but difficulties may arise when the instrument you have chosen to learn presents a greater challenge in terms of making the sound. So creating a sound on the piano, for instance, is initially a straightforward process. All you have to do is use your percussive approach, press down the key, strike the key, and then release it. But playing the piano, even though we do musical typing here with a computer, it's not really like typing. There are ways, to play the piano so that it sounds more musical. So creating a sound on the piano is initially a straightforward process of pressing the key down and releasing it, which poses few, if any, problems for most beginners. But creating a sound on a brass instrument, for instance, like a flute or an oboe or a trumpet, is potentially more difficult. So brass instrument, meaning trumpet, wind instrument like a flute or an oboe, a woodwind instrument, is potentially more difficult because you have to think about, okay, using your mouth, using your embouchure, but then you're also playing a monophonic instrument, so you just have to think, okay, which clef am I going to be in? Because playing the piano uses the grand staff, and you're using two clef signs. So if that's a problem with you, it's a problem for you visually, think about that too, but don't give up. So I had two students at one time that were both playing the trumpet, and they both equally found it difficult to play using the bass clef. They felt totally comfortable with treble clef. So, who knows? It is possible to follow instruction given via a website, but any difficulties you encounter will almost certainly be overcome more easily if a teacher is present in the room with you. And I know why they're saying this, because a teacher can answer that question right away. If you have a question, oh, what does this mean? You'll be surprised at how many students get really distracted by just a mark on the page, which has nothing to do with the music. It has to do with the printer, or it has to do with the editor, or it has to do with the person who arranged that particular piece. It really has nothing to do with making music itself, but they get so distracted by some visual things that appear on the page. So a teacher can right away say, oh, you should pay attention to this, or just ignore this, or pay more attention to, and then fill in the blank. So one approach that can overcome this is a real-time internet-based lesson. So sometimes you have teachers that offer Skype lessons. I've worked with a couple of my friends, not students. They didn't sign up for the service, but just friends in the past that said, hey, just around the world. I'm in fill in the blank this week, and I'm going to have some time on my hands. I'm on tour. Can you maybe show me, or I'm in town, can you show me something on the piano, but I can't come to your location. Let's just see what we can talk through over Skype. It may be a situation like that. So certainly there are more conference options now than Skype that's out there, but it's considered a form of video conference style teaching, and it has been used worldwide. And in some places, probably more than others. Let's say if you're in a more urban area and you need to teach someone who's in a more country area or rural area, and so it's just going to be too difficult for them to come to you, or difficult for the teacher to visit where you are, then and there may be some restrictions in place, and it's just easier for you to just do it via Skype or conference style teaching. So just consider that. You may find a teacher who is able to work with you in this way if traveling to lessons is difficult to you, or vice versa, and then just find out if that teacher has experience of working in this way. And then also talk to other students to see if they can help you decide which teacher is the best for you. So, in my opinion, there are really, really big benefits to having someone who's real, who's live, preferably in a studio situation, rather than just relying on technology. But if you're comfortable with technology, then go for it. And that's my thought for today. Okay, we've been talking about practicing. We've been talking about teaching yourself. Today's focus has been on teaching you more chords. And of course, we can say more about chords next time, because we will continue our discussion about chords and talking about inversions for next week. So I hope you'll look for that. And then the week after that, I hope to move into seventh chords. Now, a book that you can refer to for today's chords that we talked about, I would say take out the Piano Chord Dictionary. You know, we have several sources that we use here on the podcast. Piano Chord Dictionary is just one of them. We were talking about keys, and I did mention just briefly relative minors, although I didn't elaborate. But this book does talk about major keys and relative minors. So if that's of interest to you, then check out this book. As far as chords go, they talk about major, minor, diminished, augmented, sixth chords, seventh chords, ninth chords, 11th chords, 13th chords. And then they give you a chord chart and then a major scale chart on the back cover of the book. So feel free to check out this book, and then they give you a guide on how to use the book. So where it talks about how chords are formed, we're really going to get into that next week, because we will talk about inversions, something we've been just mentioning slowly over time, over the past 6 weeks or so. Okay, so now I'm going to turn to the page where it talks about G flat and just see how they pictured it here. And then we're going to go back and pick up B. So if you're wondering when I'm going to play the piano again, I'm going to tell you about that in just a moment. Let's go with G flat. Okay, so in this book, it looks like they are spelling the chords inharmonically. So we started off near the top of the podcast episode talking about the inharmonic spelling of chords and scales. So pictured here on page 42, you see where it says F sharp, and then in small print beside that, it says also G flat. Here's where you can get a teacher involved, because if you're looking for G flat, if you're listening to the podcast and you go, you know, C major was talking about G flat chords today, but I have this book and it doesn't say in big letters, it doesn't say G flat. It says F sharp, also G flat. What do they mean by that? So right away, this helps you answer that question. So they give it to you as F sharp, A sharp, G sharp. What they don't say is inharmonically beside that, spell it as G flat, B flat, D flat. They just keep it as F sharp, A sharp, C sharp. And there you have it. Well, let's turn to B. Will be really interesting if they tell you, oh, this is how you play a C flat chord. And that'd be interesting, but they don't do that. But the interesting thing is they do spell out the B chord as an inversion of a B major chord. So how we were doing it in our musical typing, we played a B first, followed by a D sharp, and then I went back and picked up the F sharp, which means the F sharp would start the triad. So spell it as F sharp on the bottom, B in the middle, and then D sharp on the top. So your first and your third and your fifth would be F sharp, followed by B, followed by D sharp, in this book. And if you wanted to go ahead and just invert it so that it's in root position, go ahead and play B first, followed by D sharp, and then followed by F sharp. And if anybody has any questions about how this is pictured, if you still can't think in terms of letter names, then think in terms of black and white key relationship. We can help you with that. Also, if you're looking to write this down, see us tomorrow at the C Major Radio Show, because we'll talk about that over there. I had a student that was recently a little confused about how to write, what the rules were for writing out accidentals. So we're talking about that now. Also see the podcast where we talk about accidentals and not accidents over at the C Major Radio Show. So we recorded that, I believe it was last year. So if you look that up, if you search that, it should come up for you. Also, see the really useful poster. They have a series of posters that are coming out. They're building. I put a link on our Facebook page. And from time to time, I will shout out some of the things that come across my desk. I'm not advertising for anyone. I haven't been asked to advertise. I haven't been invited. It's just, it comes across my desk. I think it will be useful to my students or for them to use, and I'll just mention it. So see us over there. And also, again, if you can get your hands on the First Steps in Music Theory book. I have a couple of students now interested in the ABRSM program. As you know, I have worked with that program in the past with students that requested me to work with them and parents who wanted to see their children on that path. And we've had some really great successes with it. So I have a couple of students that are interested now, and they're thinking, okay, where do I start with this? Do I want to start with grade 1? They need some sort of path laid out for them, and they just don't want to do random learning. So I have some other students that are not so focused, and they just want to go all over the place. Whatever pops into their head for that week, that's what they want help with. But if you're thinking about music theory, I think it's always a way to really focus yourself in your music learning and to start to think structurally about what you're playing, not just think of it as you're just feeling your way through it, or not just think of all of it as just muscle memory. And there's some really great videos online on YouTube that will talk to you about memorizing, talk to you about some of the performance practice of different pieces, especially for classical music. So see us offline for that. We can tell you what we've been saying and what we find helpful. But there has to be over 40 million ways to learn to play the piano. I'm just thinking that. Nobody said that. And just any instrument that you're interested in. So the piano, think of it as a percussion instrument. Drummers are some of my favorite people on the planet. I talked with a couple of drummers this week and just talk with them about their music making. One drummer is really, really into hard rock and owns everything by Ozzy Osbourne. Another drummer owns 4 drum sets, but chose to treat music as a hobby and to have a quote-unquote real job. So conversations come up all the time. I, from time to time, when I work out at the gym, I wear my Zildjian wristbands. I just like wearing them. And anyone who knows about cymbals will come up to me and say, hey, are you a drummer? And I'll just have to tell them, no, I'm just wearing it for fashion. But you never know. Music is all around us, and it's an opportunity to talk with someone at length, which is why I wanted to do the podcast, because I like to talk at length, if you noticed, about different subjects that come up with music making. See us over at C Major's Classroom. We're going to be posting homework probably tomorrow sometime prior to the C Major Radio Show. And then see us over at the C Major Radio Show, because we will talk about how to write down the chords that we spoke about today. How do you write a G flat chord? How do you go about writing a B chord? Maybe we'll even get into some of the enharmonics maybe we'll have you write out a G flat chord as F sharp as well, so you can see how that fits. And then I haven't chosen if I'm going to use bass clef tomorrow or if I'm going to use treble clef. So see us for that. And also, C major has some homework. I have some homework because I've been invited, happy to say, been invited to help out with another recital in the greater New York City area, because during recital time, students need someone to accompany them, and they may not be pianists themselves. They may be playing a different instrument altogether, and it's better for them to have someone live rather than just using a track. And so I help out where I can. It just feels nice to be invited, but I have to practice because some of these pieces, the accompaniment is a little challenging. So just to give you an idea of that, I will be practicing, and what I hope to do is share with you next week. We'll do what we did last week and just add a portion to the episode where I basically give a footnote and just share with you something that I'm working on. So I'm supposed to be practicing the accompaniment for a minuet, a waltz. There's something else in here. I think it's a rondo. And something from a sonata. I have something to play from a sonatina. So I hope to share a little bit with you next week and what the chords were. What the chords were when it came to those pieces. What did I find in those pieces that can be brought here to the podcast for helping you with your chords. Remember, next week we are talking about inversions. So tune in for that. And just an aside, this has nothing to do with music, but does anyone follow sports? I was just stunned by the information that came across my computer about the French Open. So I'm going to be tuning in for some replays of that match that went down. And so I can just say I'm really surprised and kind of shocked at what took place today. But if you happen to be a fan of tennis and a fan of golf and just a fan of sports, just know that from time to time we will bring up some of the things that are going on in the worldwide of sports, the worldwide arena of sports. Poll everywhere tomorrow. I'm going to be posting a poll, at least I hope to. And thank you so much for tuning in. We hope to see you next time right here on C Major Before the Show. And I'm hoping for a special guest here on next week. I really am hoping. I have someone that's promising to come on. And so we hope to make an announcement about that during the week, during one of our promos. But I hope to see you then. Have a wonderful weekend. Enjoy the weather wherever you are. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Thank you for tuning in. I'll see you next time right here on C Major Before the Show.